Do you think that this will drastically decrease eyewitness accounts report and lead to convictions based on circumstantial evidence?
You going to law school? We're well aware of the fact that if the legislation passes, this will require a major educational effort that we're going to have to undertake, first of all, with high school students across the state of Utah, to educate them as to the responsibility to make the call. That's one. When the bill was heard last month, somebody testified from the local district attorney's office. They see a clear split. I think this will best answer your question, between the bystander who didn't make the call, who is now liable criminally, and a witness to the event who has actually seen the event and the police took a statement. From the perspective of law enforcement, those are two different categories. Your second question.
You thought the other one was nitty-gritty. This one's going to be.
Okay. Fire away.
Like in the cash case specifically, I think it goes to the extent that you can argue that they're at this point just like aiding and abetting the crime.
Right.
So why do you see a distinction?
Good for you. In the law, there's a difference between complicity, being an accomplice, and aiding and abetting. The district attorney in Nevada, whose name I don't remember her name, felt that there was no conspiracy between Cash and Strohmeyer. She didn't feel that Cash was an accomplice to it. She didn't feel that Cash had aided and abetted in accordance with the Nevada legislation, and therefore Cash gets a free pass. Most people, because he followed them into the bathroom, it wasn't part of a plan, leaves by however you define various laws, aiding and abetting, accomplice. Cash doesn't mean difference. Other questions? Go ahead.
Similar to Leora's question, who asked about calling
She's
911.
Leora. I figured that, okay.
In communities that are poorer, they're often communities of racial minorities, such as Black communities or Latino communities, and often in those neighborhoods there's more crime. And where there's more crime, especially when there's a street culture, whether that's a lot of people just being on the street or whatever that means, where there's more crime, there are more bystanders. And so it seems to me that this legislation would disproportionately affect those communities, because not only is there a fear of law enforcement and a higher rate of crime just because they're poorer areas, there's also a lot more people to view the crime, which would put a lot more people in criminal liability, which would put more people, especially people of color, in jail, which is already a big problem in this country.
And in the name of full disclosure, what you just articulated now is the reason that in Utah, the ACLU is not fully on board with the legislation. Not adamantly opposed, but not fully on board, and I don't want to speak on their behalf. Their concern, and they testified last month, their concern is that legislation like this would, in the world of unintended consequences, would result in inequitable incarceration along racial lines. The answer to that, at least for me, and you don't agree with me, is, with all due respect to that argument, what stands in front of me is the victim. Where all someone had to do was make the 911 call to alert the authorities as to the peril of that person, and the victim's need for assistance for me outweighs any other consideration, but I get the argument.
So would the 20 people watching all have to call 911?
Right, so we've created what are called concentric circles, and we've also, in legislation, said that if you have reasonable belief that someone else made the phone call, then you're off the hook.
I have two questions also. The first is related to collages. So why do you think that there needs to be like separate legislation for bystander complicity instead of just strengthening like aiding and abetting?
Because the crime of omission is different than the crime of commission. Aiding and abetting is a commission. The failure to is a crime of omission. The law distinguishes separation between commission and omission. And the 10 states, and whatever countries that have this, as in Utah, are very clear that it falls under the category of omission rather than commission, because aiding and abetting is a positive act. I've done something. I also should have added, sorry, that in Utah, there's presently bystander legislation with respect to children and the elderly. So in many ways, this bill would be an add-on, would be an extension of already existing legislation.
What does that law say?
That if you see a child and or an elderly person in peril, you have to dial 911.
Otherwise, you're legally responsible.
Exactly right. And your second question?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of this, like the bystander legislation, like if you're a bystander, there are studies that show that it's like really against human psychology to want to intervene, and especially if there are a lot of people there or a lot of perpetrators, that it's just like not in our psychology.
You're right. The research, by the way, I need to add, the bystander as a field of study was born in 1963, 64 in New York as a result of the murder of Kitty Genovese. Until then, it was a largely unstudied field. The research is, not to offend anybody who's been involved in it, is not overwhelmingly sophisticated. It tells you pretty basic things. One, if there are lots and lots and lots of bystanders, nobody will make the call. If the fewer the bystanders there are, the more likely that somebody will call. You know, fight or flight, will I help you, will I not help you? But research, again, I'm not a psychologist, I happen to be the son of a psychologist. The research is really not, as I mentioned earlier, about the victim perspective and also the bystander's perspective. It's not really overwhelmingly insightful, unfortunately. Other questions? Go ahead. Fire away. Boy, girl. I don't know, how does that work? Fire away.
Boss.
You're the boss, man.
I'm just wondering, I was thinking about how I don't think the bystander is well, they're obviously not, in my opinion, as guilty as the perpetrator.
Of course.
But, so do you still consider them a criminal?
Sure. So in Utah, it'd be a misdemeanor. It's what's called a Class B misdemeanor. Maximum jail time is 6 months at $1,500. But I need to go back to when I gave the talk at UVA, where I talked about Sharice Iverson. I got asked your question there. I told them 6 months, $1,500. Every hand went up in the room and said that to send David Cash to jail for 6 months for having watched his friend sexually assault a 7-year-old child is to disrespect her memory. They recommended that it not be a misdemeanor in that case, but be a felony, and that Cash, who witnessed Strohmeyer assaulting a 7-year-old girl, needs to go to jail for a number of years. Just a note. Go ahead.
Given that the bystanders are taking, a non-active approach to the situation, and aren't behaving in a, typical.
They are acting untypical.
No, in a typically, criminal manner.
I see.
Actively
Right.
doing something. The whole role is something very inactive. Do you think incarceration of those people is, given the state of the prison system, is something that would?
It's a really
be
interesting
effective?
question. That came up in the testimony in February. From the perspective of the district attorney, again, I'm not speaking, I don't represent him, right? It would only be in the extreme cases, I think, from his perspective, that they would request incarceration. Because you're right, there is a problem. You have overcrowding at the hotel. On the other hand, if you believe in what is in the law called general deterrence, to incarcerate a bystander for 6 months, and have a lot of media attention focused on that, the expectation would be that that would at least give pause to the next bystander down the road. And again, I think that would be in the unusual case where there would be incarceration, but I don't think that could never happen. But again, I suggest focusing on this not from the perspective of the bystander, but from the perspective of the victim. In the back.
Thanks so much for coming, first of all. So I'm resonating a lot with some of our students who have commented on how this legislation might disproportionately impact folks of color and poor communities, and I'm wondering, have you considered working with the ACLU to develop something that actually doesn't go through the police? To think about alternatives where you could take the same idea and work with organizations in sort of a grassroots way that sort of, especially considering the police and criminal justice system as an institution, there's a lot of complicity in that system. And so just in thinking of what are other ways, like, could you imagine envisioning a different route
Yeah.
for your idea?
We have thought about that, but at the end of the day, we thought about, if you will, like two-folded approach. One, or two-headed. One is the law, and two is an educational effort, whether that be with the ACLU or with high schools across the state of Utah or elsewhere, talks like this. But I genuinely believe at the end of the day that, with all due respect to, call it community efforts, there are indeed people like David Cash and Prelo who need to be punished for